all my speeches ready. It was a videotape on now?
Yeah, I just turned it on.
Oh, well, what did you want to hear about?
Well, maybe you could just tell us a little about why you went to public schools instead of the father school.
Oh, the reason why I did not go to father schools is because two of the Indian boys told me, don't ever go to a father school because the rulings there are so strict. It's like going to a reform school. And they have too dang much of a dictatorial powers there. And that is what eventually probably caused that school to shut down because of lack of attendance. Because the kids hated to go to school where they were forced to do the things that they didn't want to do. And then the reason why I went to public school here is because I already had a feeling that in order to be fully accepted at the university, I'd have to go to a public school rather than Chimao or father school or elsewhere, because this public school here is more accredited. And therefore, when I graduated from grade school here, then I went into high school, and then I felt relatively safe when I found out my average was 85 point something here at Ronan High School during my 4 years of high school. But then I could have had a higher average if I had done some studying. Now, there were some courses which I hated. I wouldn't study. I did that just to show the teacher how much I hated that course. But that was a sad mistake I made. And therefore, going to these public schools was for the benefit of attending the university later on.
It was pretty uncommon to go to university for Indians at that time. And can you tell us about that? What it was like to go to the university, being an Indian man at that time?
Oh yes. Well, here in Ronan High School, I was the first full-blood Indian to graduate from Ronan High School. And during the 4 years of high school here, I was the only Indian attending the high school here. Now, usually the Indian kids would quit when they were in their about 5th grade, because they were told by their parents, you can quit school now because you're going to learn how to hunt and fish, and the girls would be told how you're going to learn how to tan hides and gather food and so on, you're going to make your living later on. And then those kids were just tickled and glad to quit. They had no desire to learn the way I did. I had an intense thirst for knowledge. I wanted to have a better living than they did. And then when I entered the university, just Joe Arley and I were the only full-bloods who went to school there. Well, Joe Arley went to school for only about 1 quarter, then he dropped out. And now, after Joe Arley left at the end of the quarter, then I was the only full-blood left going to school there. And it was easy for me because I had been so used to being the only Indian here in Ronan High School, well, grade school and high school, and also being the only Indian at the university. Well, there were some half-breeds there, but I mean, I'm talking about full-bloods. And then when I went to teach at Ronan High School, I went to all the MEA conventions at Montana Education Association. I also went to the MALT convention, that's Montana Association of Language Teachers conventions. And as one superintendent told his wife, Larry Parker is the only Indian who goes to those conventions, teachers' conventions. And it's true that when I went to Billings. They have had as many as 2,000 teachers there. I could not find a single Indian teacher there. And likewise with Missoula, Kalispell, and Great Falls. I was the only Indian there, my gosh. No, we do have dozens of Indian teachers around the state, and I completely fail to see why they did not go to these conventions. I do know that they are educational. Then in these conventions, they would bring up new methods of teaching there. You probably know about that as much as I do. But anyway, that's why I went to these conventions. And then I began to form new friendships there. As a result, I know some people from practically every town in the state. And therefore, I had no trouble getting along with the whites in my grade school, high school, and college days, and during my teaching days. And it was, well, I tried my best not to cause any animosity with them at all. I like to be friendly. As a matter of fact, I like to talk to anybody. Now, like at Independence, Missouri, I was going to say hello to Truman, but he disappeared too fast after he gave the talk. And then when I had dinner with President Johnson at Washington during a banquet, my boss, the theater owner, told his guests, Larry's having a dinner with President Johnson. And that night, Myrna Loy was there too. I was going to say hello to Myrna and possibly Johnson, but they both disappeared from that head table too soon. So I didn't get a chance to say hello to either one at both Washington and New York. And right now, I know two of the governors by their, well, I know two governors, ex-governors, well enough to call them by their first name. That's Tim Babcock and then that Tom Judge. And when I did meet Tim, I didn't know how to address him. I was tongue-tied, and later on I apologized. And he said, well, just call me Tim. And then I knew Tom because he and I went on a trip on the same train to New York World's on that Montana Centennial train. And then later he became the governor. And well, that just about covers about my being the only Indian in these schools and teaching jobs.
Mm-hmm. And, can you tell me anything more about how relations between Indians and whites were on the reservation in a more general sense during the early years of your life?
Oh yeah, I do know that in my grade school, high school, and college days, there was always some sort of a secret animosity between the whites and the Indians. But I got along with them very nicely. And I do know that, well, one hotel owner here in Ronan did not want the Indians to stay in her hotel because they were Indians. And I thought if she felt that way, then why the hell doesn't she move back to England or somewhere and where she will not be running into Indians anymore. And of course, it's perfectly obvious that when the Indians realized that they were being hated, then in turn they hated the whites too, especially the old-timers. And therefore, they, of course, did not show right off, you know, out in the open. They couldn't say, Tom, I hate you because you're a white man. And likewise, you would tell me that, too, you know, right at my face. But there was a secret animosity between the two at all times. Well, even now, I have noticed that at the bars, sometimes the barmen would be more likely to throw the Indian drunks out of the bar than the whites. And then besides that, for some unknown reason, those Indian drunks who seem to like to start a fight or get themselves into trouble. That's why they're usually thrown out. And I think this slight animosity will continue for years and years and years, probably.
Well, I know that you're one of the most knowledgeable people on the reservation about powwow songs, and I was wondering if you could tell me about powwows during those earlier days on the reservation, what they were like.
Yeah, in the old days, back in the 1920s, we used to have good ones at our lead powwow. They'd have as many as 200 teepees there. And then those were the days where just nothing but the local, the Flatheads and the Kootenays attended that powwow. If we had as many as 3, 4, 5, or 6 visitors from other reservations, it was unusual. And therefore, we would carry on our own ceremonial dances and songs here at our lead powwow to our liking, like canvas dances and scalp dances and etc. And then we enjoyed doing those things. And they hardly ever had any stick games or card games in those days. But whenever they did have a stick game, it was usually only once or twice during the 10-day powwow. Now, a pressure was eventually put on to the powwow committees. They said, well, according to our treaty laws, we are entitled to gamble at the powwows. Why can't we make use of that stipulation? They said, well, okay, we'll start to have stick games. And they began to add Walooks there. And later on, poker and blackjack. And they tried to add other things like slot machines, but the powwow committee said, never. We'll never have any slot machines or any other. Just those things, stick games, blackjack and poker, and that's all. They could have Walooks if they wanted to. And now, in the 1930s, it was relatively easy to have a poker game, set up a poker game, because it costs only about $35 or $50 for the 10-day powwow. Well, of course, the money was scarce then. And but later on, when the powwows became bigger and bigger, and people began to buy cars where they could travel, then we began to have visitors from other reservations. And then that's when the stick games were sort of reborn again. And because then those visiting Indians would play against the Flatheads or Blackfeet against the Flatheads, or other tribes would play against each other, because the Flatheads hate to play amongst themselves, because some of them are, well, like one day I bet on one side and sat down. I saw my wife was on the other side. Oh, jeez. It was I was playing against my own wife. But then when different tribes play, then it's all right. They don't feel self-conscious about playing against their own relatives. Now, when we had a sheriff named Wallace J. Beaudry on this county years ago, he was one of those over-ambitious types of politicians. He wanted to enforce all the gambling laws in the county. And he stopped all the poker games in just about every kind of a gambling in the county, including the dices which people shot, at the cafes or somewhere for their coffee. Sometimes 2 or 3 or 6 men will sit down and say, "Let's shoot dice, see who pays for these coffees." And everybody was, yeah, let's do. Then if some person was lucky, he could go to that shooting dice and never pay for his coffee for weeks and weeks. And some unlucky guy would be the ones who would be paying for the coffee quite frequently. Now, then they had a powwow and a rodeo at Polson rodeo grounds. And one of his stooges, that's Beaudry stooges, evidently told him that they're gambling to beat the heck at the rodeo grounds. So Beaudry dashed across there and he told everybody, gambling must cease. It's against the Montana laws for anyone to gamble. Since it was the last day of the powwow, then everybody packed up and left. However, 2 or 3 weeks later, we had the Arlee powwow. And again, one of his deputies must have told him they are again gambling at the Arlee powwow. So Beaudry broke the state record traveling from Polson to Arlee. And he skidded to a stop there at the Arlee powwow grounds, and he swaggered out of his police car and told everybody, gambling must cease right now. It's against the Montana laws for anybody to gamble. But he did not realize that he was breaking the treaty laws, Beaudry was. And that's when the Flatheads took action, and they said, "We're going to sue him." And they sued him for a measly $300 for amount of time that he stopped the games. Yeah, that's about how much the people evidently lost during the stoppage. And well, that made Beaudry so dang mad that he used the Montana laws and kept the whites from gambling. And that was the most embarrassing thing that happened. For years I've had steady white customers in my poker games. Now, whenever one of them came in and threw a $5, $10, $20 bill across the table, said, "Larry, give me some chips," and I tell him, "You can't play." Well, his feelings would be hurt right away because he thought I did not want his trade, or I didn't want him around. But I'd go into all the trouble explaining Beaudry's new ruling. Well, that began to make them mad at him. And it would be surprising for you to know that how many whites go to these powwows just for the simple reason of gambling. Now, a lot of whites know how to play stick game, and they know how to make bets in stick games. They go to stick game, poker, and blackjack. And of course, some of them go just primarily to watch the war dances. And some go there for the rodeo or just to walk around and meet their friends and whatever. But the gamblers who went there, instead of going clear to Nevada, they go to Arlee because they can either win or lose as much as they would in Nevada. And then when they realized that Beaudry will not let them gamble at the Indian powwows anymore, that just irritated them. So when the next election came, well, Beaudry thought he was going to garner a lot of votes by stopping all the gambling laws, or enforcing all the gambling laws. He thought he'd get hundreds of votes more. But instead of that, he was cutting his own throat. He lost hundreds of votes because of it. So because of that, Beaudry was defeated by the worst landslide of sheriff's defeat imaginable in this Lake County because of that. Now, on the end, when he saw the results of the election, he probably thought, what went wrong? What did I go wrong? And then his best friends probably told me that was because you tried to stop all the gamblers